This video is proudly brought to you by my lifelong sponsor, coffee. I want to start this review off by talking about my history, not only with Borderlands, but the looter shooter genre as a whole. I believe it adds a little bit of context to my opinion. After all, a die-hard fan of any genre is less likely to offer genuine criticism and just simply regurgitate their own bias. I'm certainly not a looter shooter fanatic. My genre of choice, if one exists, would be RPGs. But there's something fundamentally fun about switching off your brain and just playing a game. That feeling of fun and letting go started the very moment I pulled the trigger, diving headfirst into a gameplay loop that is as chaotic as it is captivating. Borderlands 2 Core Loop is a perfect distillation of the looter shooter genre. You shoot enemies, they drop loot, you equip better guns to shoot more challenging enemies, and repeat. The gunplay is simple yet satisfying, a visceral power fantasy that rewards you with an almost endless supply of procedurally generated weaponry. Every firefight is an unhinged frenzy of bullets, explosions, and enemies erupting into a glorious bloody mess, making the combat feel like a violent ballet. The pure, unadulterated joy of this loop is the game's greatest strength, making it almost impossible to put down. The Borderlands franchise has carved out a unique and enduring space in the gaming landscape, pioneering a hybrid genre that melds the visceral satisfaction of a first-person shooter with the addictive, compulsive progression of a loot-driven RPG. It is a series defined by its distinct, cel-shaded aesthetic, its arsenal of procedurally generated weaponry, and its brand of irreverent, grating humor. With that said, Borderlands is by no means a perfect franchise. Borderlands 3 felt more of the same, which isn't inherently a negative, but when coupled with poor level design and poorly written antagonists, the experience was wholly unremarkable. Tiny Tina's Wonderland attempted to add RPG-light elements, justified by the entire game taking place as a D&D game, a brave move that was ultimately let down by the writing and characters. Borderlands 2 is often cited as the penultimate entry, and it isn't hard to see why. Borderlands 2 is a tight, focused experience that puts its strongest foot first and never stops running. So when I play a game called Borderlands, I expect to play a game that gives me the chance to switch off my brain and shoot, and that's exactly what I got here. It's an objectively simple gameplay loop, one not bogged down by unnecessary fluff. Sure, the schoolyard humor the series has become forever entangled with is here, but it's restrained. Claptrap, quite possibly the most annoying video game character ever written, is surprisingly less obscene, and in fact it managed to get a laugh out of me here and there, contrast to both subsequent entries where I would often play the game completely on mute. There were even moments in the story that were actually, dare I say it, compelling. Considering I've had the wider narrative spoiled by dozens of YouTube videos, I was surprised to find myself engaged from time to time. With 60 hours under my belt and 2 DLCs completed, Borderlands 2 is an absolutely good time, despite some minor yet fundamental issues. So beware of spoilers. Although this isn't a lore video, I will be touching on the ending as well as showing some new game plus and late game footage.
Just about enough then.
So the only way I could play Borderlands 2, at least on PS5, was to purchase the Handsome Jack collection. I bring this up because alongside of a whole host of DLC and the optional Ultra HD visual upgrade pack, I was immediately rewarded with a significant amount of badass tokens. These are naturally obtained as you play the game by killing X amount of this or performing Y amount of that, and then can be spent incrementally increasing various stats from gun damage, elemental status buildup, or shield recharge rate, to name a few. Another distinct advantage I had of playing a game quickly approaching its 12th birthday was the large amount of golden keys available to me. These are used to open a chest in Sanctuary, your main hub, which will reward you with items based on your current level. I bring this up because A, it meant I had a clear advantage because of the RNG loot system, where the color of the weapon dictates the amount of stat bonuses that gun has. By using these golden keys early on, it allowed me to play the game with purple or pink gear, where otherwise I would have been stuck with grey or greens. And B, I want to be completely transparent with you. As it turns out, it was a good thing that I had access to all these golden keys too, because I didn't obtain my first legendary until the final boss of the Assault on Dragon Keep DLC, which happened to be a grenade with worse stats than the grenade I currently had equipped. Now, this isn't a dig at the fact that I only obtained my first legendary item 50 hours into my run, but rather an observation of Borderlands' random loot mechanic and its inability to appropriately reward the player for surviving difficult encounters. This was a genuine source of reoccurring frustration for me. I would routinely clear out room after room of tough enemies only to find myself with a plague of common and uncommon guns. Adding a few handcrafted weapons into the mix wouldn't break the game's core gameplay loop. If anything, it would be beneficial to the players who are unlucky enough not to have rolled guns with the appropriate leveled stats. As I mentioned, gear rarity arguably plays more of an important role than the weapon's raw damage output, simply because you could have a pistol that deals 100 damage, or another pistol that deals 30 damage, but shoots 4 bullets and explodes when you reload it, or a shotgun that shoots exploding rounds and fires 8 shots at once. The rarer the gear, the more stats that weapon has. And trust me when I tell you that I was able to get through the vast majority of Borderlands 2 with a gear set consisting of guns often 5 levels lower than my character's level. To drive the point home, the grenade that carried me through around 60% of the campaign dealt over 20,000 damage while also spawning 10 smaller grenades. I was using this grenade from level 20 to about level 30. Don't get me wrong, the combat framework and gameplay loop are incredibly strong, easily the best in the looter shooter genre, but when 10 levels can go by without finding a grenade that would remotely come close to matching what I already had equipped, then something just isn't quite right. Introspectively, the game is clearly forcing the player to rely on skill rather than gear set, but when the enemy design is reliant on said weaponry, then there's a clear disconnect scratching beneath the surface. But before you've dropped into the chaotic world of Pandora, you have to select your class, which doesn't lock you into any one individual weapon type, it just affects your ultimate. For me, I chose the Commando class, whose ultimate summoned a turret that was eventually upgraded with the ability to shoot rockets, and if I invested enough time, could spawn a second turret. The turret, now I've said turret too many times and the word has lost all meanings, had a twofold benefit to combat encounters. Not only did it deal some fairly decent damage, but also drew the attention of all the enemies around me, allowing me to gain a better position, reload, or time for my shield to recharge. And that's the best possible segue into discussing the combat. There's just something primal about engaging with dozens of enemies swarming around you from every direction and watching their bodies explode in an eruption of gore and loot. This is despite my issue with character movement, but with a combat loop this fun, even my small complaints are easily forgiven. Enemy variation provides another tactical layer to the combat loop, forcing you to have at least one of each elemental type in your arsenal. Shock damage for enemies with shields, corrosive damage for armored enemies, and burn damage for fleshy fiends. To top all that off, you'll have to get used to the different type of enemies and their behavior. Some will rush you, others will hang back and take pop shots, others will have a second phase where if you don't kill them quick enough, they'll fuck your shit up. Bosses offered a unique challenge with none necessarily being difficult. Most of my deaths from boss encounters were down to the imprecise movement. The floatiness of jumping was a real pain. You just feel like you're hanging in midair just slightly too long, which often resulted in me getting hit by a boss's AoE attack, even when it looked like I was well and truly out of range. These are small gripes to be sure, particularly when comparing it against a gunplay framework this strong, but when I get rushed by a horde of enemies for the upteenth time and there's no way for me to effectively escape, those small gripes begin to fester. The gunplay not only felt fantastic, but the audio feedback for combat in general was top tier. It's a shame then that the rest of the soundscape was lacking, since there's no real soundtrack or ambient sounds whatsoever. Aside from the wildlife who provide you with some handy audio cues before they attack, outside of that, the world of Pandora just didn't feel alive. It got particularly disappointing when I'd find myself in an empty zone after clearing out an arena or entering a new one, just to be met by the sounds of my own footsteps. Any criticisms I have leveled against the sound design certainly don't apply to the voice acting, with some truly noteworthy performances here. Handsome Jack absolutely steals the show, but look, despite my pure hatred for Claptrap as a thing that has to exist in this timeline, even I have to appreciate the talent required to bring him to life.
Stairs? No!
We've spent about 1,000 words or so highlighting combat, and there's actually a lot more to it. Character builds are very flexible and completely open to experimentation, with the option to respec whenever you please. There's also class-specific accessories and shields that have a wide range of bonuses. All of this combines to offer a fairly robust customization system. So what about the story, the narrative pavement that guides us and gives us a reason to progress through each encounter? Well, it's definitely here. There is a story, a beginning, a middle, and an end, but I found it completely unnecessary to pay attention to for two reasons. One, because Borderlands 2 is really Handsome Jack's story. He's the main villain and arguably the main character, with every other NPC, including the player character, being nothing more than side dishes. Borderlands' narrative is defined by its antagonist rather than being complemented by it. Everything revolves around Handsome Jack, to the point that if he's removed from the story, everything collapses. It just meant that when I wasn't being actively harassed by him or feeling his presence, I really didn't care about why I was doing what I was doing. Handsome Jack is the type of antagonist you just want to punch. Not kill, mind you, but you just really want to hurt him. Imagine if Tony Stark went bad. That's Handsome Jack in a nutshell. It's a compelling archetype that's very rarely done well elsewhere, with most other attempts in other media coming across as too try-hardy. The second reason being you, the player character, who has almost no pre-existing relationship with Handsome Jack, outside of failing to kill him in the opening cutscene. This narrative key really makes you feel like a merc for hire. He didn't steal your fortune or murder your family, you just want him dead. Pure and simple. The side characters add more depth to that rather simple but effective starting point. My favorite moment is at the very end, where Handsome Jack is blustering about how he's better than you and all the population of Pandora are just scum. You think it's a cutscene until you realize that you can shoot him mid-sentence. It's this type of meta writing that really shows you how far Borderlands fell as a series, at least when it came to the overall narrative. It's interesting to look back particularly at Tiny Tina's Wonderland, a game I really despise, since it just felt like it reveled in wasting my time, but it put its story front and center, and it really suffered because of it. Borderlands 2 keeps the story as the garnish, which I think works best for this type of genre. My thoughts on the narrative only extends for the main campaign and not the DLC, since the two that I completed didn't suffer from this flaw, if that's what you want to call it. Granted, one of those is a condensed version of the main story, and was actually more compelling overall, since it was used by Tiny Tina as a way of healing her trauma. And look, the art direction, we've got to talk about the art direction, it is Borderlands after all. Well, it took me completely by surprise, because I hated the cel-shaded aesthetic in Tiny Tina's Wonderland. For whatever reason, I found it incredibly garish, and yet here, I found myself just enjoying the visuals, particularly in this moment, where you can actually see the image in my scope move as I move the gun. Some of this may have to do with the HD visual upgrade pack enabled, but you know, I think there's a lot more to be said for art direction rather than graphic fidelity. Borderlands 2 is a game best judged not by its individual systems, but by the sum of its parts. The loot system is fundamentally flawed, and yet I was addicted to the combat loop. Maneuverability was cumbersome and clunky, and yet I look forward to each encounter. The story was invisible to me, and yet I wanted to see my companions succeed and ultimately defeat Handsome Jack. I said at the start of this video that Borderlands perfected the looter shooter genre, and I really stand by that. That perfection is right here with Borderlands 2. So, do I recommend you go back and play Borderlands 2? Yes. The simple answer is yes. Particularly if you're on a budget and you can't afford the latest entry. Borderlands 2 is a genre-defining title that's easily worth the price of entry. Ultimately, revisiting Borderlands 2 was a powerful reminder of what makes it a timeless classic. It's a game that doesn't just survive, it thrives on its confident identity. It's a blend of satisfying, chaotic gunplay, a decent enough story, and an addictive loot system that makes it a benchmark for the genre. More than a decade after its original release, it stands as a testament to the power of a well-executed vision. For new players and old, it's a game that's always ready to welcome you home, guns blazing and pockets ready for a glorious, messy pile of loot.
Inside, chrome as a bloom, blaze of fire beneath.